just about any game very, very good. I think that ultimately we're limited by what we like. And it's fine, that there's some level of we can distantiate ourselves from what we like enough that we can try to make games that other people will enjoy, which is amazing. But there's only so much we can do. I could not design a racing game. It would be impossible for me to do that because I have no passion whatsoever for that. So if the trend was all about racing games right now, I would not be making a racing game, even if it was, I was assured I would sell,
Yeah.
So it's not so much, I think, that it's more or less important. I think it just falls down to the logic of what can we do as individuals, as part of a team, how can we contribute? And I think that from that standpoint becomes clear that if you set out to do a particular game, then it's about looking at the landscape and how you can adjust to it.
Yeah. So let's say now, I mean, you provide some really great insight there too. And so let's say in my, made up case here, I'm really passionate about making an action platformer. I'm inspired of, playing Mega Man all those years when I was growing up and everything. And my focus is, this isn't going to be like a one-time thing. I have a small, a small team in place right now. And so what are like the next types of things? And mind you, I'm coming from an experience where I am not a developer, so there's probably a lot of things that I'm not thinking of too. But like, what are additional things? Like, you provided some insight that gives me, good focus and stuff. But what are other objectives that I might be missing in terms of like, is there a potential or is there even a need to scale further depending on, what my overall vision or scope is? And then, we can probably go from there a little bit more.
So there are two different objectives that are being pursued at once, and both of them need to succeed, and both of them are kind of working one against the other. Let me explain.
Okay.
If you're going to try to be established as a studio that does platforming games of a particular type, let's say Mega Man Love Letters, very, very well, you will need to reach a point where you're not just making them, you're actually one of the best ones to do it.
Okay.
Which means you need both to build expertise internally and probably bring external expertise of people that are actually rock at doing that and convince them to join you, which is the one objective. This is an objective that's almost impossible to achieve at first until your studio has proven that there's a reason to even go there. Like, you could potentially find the best programmer in the world to do these types of games, and they'd never be, interested in working for you, with you, because all you are is a name. If you're going to say, oh, this is my studio, and we've never delivered anything, but we want to make this game, it's going to be awesome, please come over. Which you've probably seen a lot of if you look around communities and Reddit. Most people are just going to say, oh, we could do rev share. And even if you don't, which I think is very important, especially in this day and age, even if you actually offer to pay them, the odds of actually landing the talent that you need is very unlikely. The people that you want to make something very particular are harder to convince than just giving them, a bag of money.
Right.
So while you need to build towards that, building that studio that can deliver these amazing games, right? You also need to build an expertise and a certain brand. You need to show that your team can deliver something, and so on and so forth. And so this paves the way. We have to look at it as a very long horizon, because I'm working on the other assumption, and we're talking about building the studio part, which, from my earlier point, this is one of the questions where we branched out.
Yep.
Some people would just have wanted to make the one game. We've moved away from that, and we've directly shifted our attention towards, we're thinking about the long play here, the legacy play, where we're saying our studio in 10 years from now will be known for having delivered some of the best experiences with that genre. And so what needs to happen between now and then is a lot of stepping stones. One of them, we talked about developing an expertise for that. You said that you didn't have any background in development necessarily. So first thing you need to do is probably, let's make one. It's not going to be good, but we have to start someplace, right?
Yep.
So if you're going to think about the long play for a studio, and you're going to make a game that's not necessarily going to be amazing, how do you ensure that the studio actually keeps existing after these titles get released, even though they may not make their money back? Because that's a very important, I think, item. Yeah. I feel like I'm always focusing on the money, but ultimately the survival of the studio sort of falls back into, we need to generate as much as we're paying out, otherwise it doesn't work.
Right.
Um, there's a number of avenues of going there, but my question would probably be at that point, I would get back to you and say, what's your short-term plan to do that? Because ultimately you have the long-term goal, and do you have a short-term intermediary goal that you'd be okay to settle with so that you get there? It,
Yeah, no, I mean, and that makes a lot of sense, and I know that's a lot of things I think even in past come up with, at least little discussions or topics about in previous episodes. But let's play on that in two ways. One, okay, well, I have a full time job, so I'm making this game, on the side whenever I have that available time. And so that's one scenario. So we'll call scenario one. And for scenario two, let's say, well, actually, we have thought about that. And outside of making our own title, we're also picking up some contract work, doing some, work for other devs. So in either scenario one and two, like how does that kind of play out? Let's focus on scenario one a little bit more, though.
so scenario one I like because it's the situation I feel like most people are going to be into. Because until you ditch everything aside, take the big leap, that's where most I'm going to call them wannabe indies.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean that in a bad sense. It's just most of us have been in that position. So you really, really want to make it seriously happen, but there's like no starting point, right? My take at it, and this is what I did as well, is there's a point where I just said, let's do a game jam. And here's why it's interesting. A game jam is a very finite amount of time, amount of resource, and you're comparing your results with other people that have the same resources, essentially, both time, maybe skill and expertise, depending what community you're doing it with. And so what that means is you're going to be compared against people that were in the same position as you were, which is very important, because if you're going to compare a game jam with release games, you're not going to compare positively, right?
Right.
But if you enter the competition and you actually end up making something that, for these amount of resources, compares positively to what everything has been done, you're starting to build a narrative here. You're saying, look, given limited resources, here's what we can achieve. Here's what other people can achieve with the same resources. This is why we're worth backing. Just not talking to any person in specific, just saying, hey, we have value as a team. Maybe it's you to your friends, and together somehow you can hash out something where somebody can do programming, somebody can do art, somebody can do audio management, integration and whatnot, just a crazy type of, I'll do everything I can just to make it happen. So you're both showing you're resourceful, you're both showing that there's a result. And it's impressive the amount of things that you can do with a completed game jam. My personal experience with that is I picked up one of the game jams that I did. I participated in 3 game jams where I did top 10, 2 of them top 5. So before I actually went, full time doing this, and I picked one of them and I said, if I had added an extra week of work, just smooth out because I was already writing on the marketing side of things in terms of this is never going to get me any money, but some people are going to talk about it. It's a miserable game. If you saw it today, you'd be it would be hard to impress anyone with that. But it's surprising how many of the qualities of finishing a product you can learn from just that cycle, which are going to be extremely helpful when you do it again, and are already going to start to. It's a very binary thing. If you've never shipped anything, you're nobody. If you ship something, regardless of what it is, you've sort of passed that area where you're different from 80% of the people out there, even probably more. And so just that is enough to get some forward momentum. And you'd be surprised the sort of things that can happen after you've put it on the market or something. In my case, I put it on Congregate, got a lot of plays, almost won a prize that was user-based in terms of voting. It was a very exciting time for something such a small game, honestly. I was comparing to games that I knew for a fact had taken over $100,000 to produce. And this is something I had done as a game jam, And this isn't because I'm special. It's just because if you put your mind to it, you really dig into it, and you deliver value at the other end, and you just measure what happens, and you're careful to what the market does, you can learn a lot of stuff out of this that's going to be incredibly relevant. So none of that you're doing for nothing, right? It's not going to bring in money, most likely, but the next time you talk with, I don't know, some kind of a indie sector publisher, they might have seen your game.
Yeah.
Might not be thinking much of it, but they might have seen it. So you really want to break that sort of your nobody stance and just turn into I'm actually somebody now. I'm a small person, but I'm in that realm now. So I think this is the best way to start. I think as a wannabe indie. I mean, you could go all in and take a loan and start a team. I think it's super risky. Some people have done it.
Yep.
Some people have done it successfully, I might add. Even locally here, it's been seen. But I think it's the risk-free approach is probably to start small, especially if you've got family and whatnot, depending your age or situation. I think it works. I think it's a good, valid approach.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of interesting because even though we really focus on scenario one there, which is, hey, I'm starting out, I have this, full-time job and everything, from at least from your experiences and the whole comparison aspect of things, it sounded like it could even relate to scenario two a little bit. Scenario two is kind of set up a little bit more sustainably and kind of like bootstrapping in terms of like finding other, revenue sources and stuff. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to like essentially having that level playing field in which you have something to show for afterwards. Because and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking that and it's not to say that this is not a good move or anything, because you need to do what you need to do, right? But for like scenario two, if you're constantly working on other people's projects, yes, you're getting that experience, but if you're like you bringing it back to what we were talking about before, it was like, what's your focus? What's your passion? What kind of games do you want to make? If all those side projects that you're working on aren't necessarily in line with your vision and goal, your ultimate goal and stuff, they might not be as helpful. They're definitely going to be helpful, but they might not be as helpful as getting really involved in putting out a product, whether it's from a game jam or just, pushing out that first game and then moving forward.
I can speak more personally about this because I've been through that.
Okay.
I would say the first year is tough in terms of focus, because the first thing you're trying to establish is how do we pay the rent, essentially. You have to pay the bills, right. You have to pay everybody's salary. First thing you need to do is basically get enough contract work in that the money that comes in is bigger than the money that comes out. And in doing so, even if you just break even, you're establishing a team, you're establishing some level of expertise. There are some tools that are likely to just happen as a result of that. So you're bidding up value regardless of how much money's coming in, as long as you break even. What happens then, at least in my experience, is there's a moment where you need to be extremely lucid about this and you need to make an actual decision. It's not going to happen passively. You're going to need to break eggs to make it happen. And you need to basically start saying a lot more no's, even if you may not have the insurances that it's a good move to do that. Even if you don't know that you're going to be able to pay the bills, you have to start saying no, and you need to start seeing the synergies. And that's the buzzword here. My particular stance on it was trying to find projects that were similar and develop the tech behind it, and then spread to different projects and owning the technology. That was our model. For the most part, worked really well because it allows us to have smaller rates, but also build a technology for our future projects and own it. So we knew we were diminishing the cost of the games that we were going to make in the future because we had built the tech for other people, but owned it.
Okay.
So the clients were super happy with that because we're talking wannabe indies that can't possibly field 100K for a particular game, right? So if you come to them and say, you know what, I'm going to do it for, I don't know, 50K, which is it's like barely covering costs,
right.
If even. But I'm going to keep the technology and I'm going to license to you. And then they're like, oh, that's an amazing deal because, I've got the technology, I got the game I wanted to make, so I don't care. And we're like, yeah, well, this is also a win-win because we have the technology, which means we've just reduced our future titles cost by 20%.
Yeah.
So that was our way of looking at things, which we've did successfully on a number of projects. I would say nearing on Project 40 anytime soon now. So it's been a wild ride. We've had a lot of projects, and we built a lot of technologies as a result. And so, and I can speak to that about very personally, like I said, because right now we're currently building one of our own, and it's built on a technology that we've basically built through these partnerships, if you will. And so this is happening finally after 3 years. I can say it was worth it. It was the long way around it, but it really helped. And like I said, I can also speak personally about the first one because I originally